Mythos Busters, investigating the mystery, monsters, and madness of Arkham Horror, the card game.
Hello and welcome to episode 53 of Mythos Busters, where we officially live in a post-Diana world. Woo! It's here! The future's
so glad
now!
It's finally behind us.
Never have to hear about it again.
Never
I am
ever.
always Sean. With me, as always, is Ian. Hi, Ian. What's your favorite part about the post-Diana world?
The favorite part of post-Diana world, I think that we're one step closer to Brown Jenkin.
That is, based on our best conjecture, I believe that to be true.
He was listed on the agenda card, so he must be coming.
And in ages past, that might have disturbed me, but I am fully looking forward to seeing his little ratty face show up on a card. Nick, what bummer statement are you gonna do to drag me down while I'm all happy about Diana Stanley in this post Diana Stanley world?
While you're rejoicing that you have Diana Stanley, I still don't have the Circle Undone, and I probably won't for another week. So, suck on that.
Well, luckily the cards don't have an expiration date.
Right.
That is helpful. Although, you're going to have to be a little careful which chat channels you poke your nose into for the next little while.
Hey, you know what? Spoiler alert. I don't care.
I know you don't care, but there's some magic in this box. So, I know a lot of people fall on different parts of that particular spectrum, but I would recommend, if it's easy for you to do so, try to avoid spoilers, because there's some cool things that happen.
Okay. Well, I mean, if none of them happen to stumble across me, or never mind, forget it. I'm already losing steam.
Well, on that note, we've got an excellent episode for you guys tonight, I promise. So we're going to start out with some reminders. We're going to check in on the community. We've got a little bit of news to catch up on. We're going to clean up some discussion topics that our patrons and other listeners have given us to discuss. And as always, we'll round it out with some technical time. So before we get to any of that, though, I want to run through just a couple reminders. Our Orbits meme contest is still going. You have time. Not much time, mind you. You have until February 14th to get those chaos or token-related memes into mythosbusterspod@gmail.com, up to 5 of them. At this point, I think we've gotten about 15 entries or so, maybe a little bit shy of that, a little bit more than that. But, the field is not wide at this point. So if you've been sitting on the fence, now's a great time to throw those memes out there, because these Orbits, these tokens, I have to say, the longer I sit with them, the more pleased I am with the purchase. Ian, concur?
Yep, and I still haven't seen any appreciable damage, even though a few have been slammed into my table in frustration. So.
Oh, man.
Looking good so far.
I palm slammed the tentacle yesterday. Oh, it was just the worst.
I threw one on my table in anger, but then it just comically rolled along my table for 3 minutes before it finally found a place. So took my grand gesture and just made it a joke.
That's kind of actually, in hindsight, that's what you want in that moment. You want to take you want to take the heat out of those sails.
Yeah, I just needed some clown music running in the background.
So anyway, if you would like to be entered to win that free set of Arbit's Chaos tokens, premium Chaos tokens, send your memes to mythosbusterspod@gmail.com. If you're unsure how to make a meme, there's super easy meme generators out there. Nick has generously linked a couple in the show notes here. So image flip meme generator. Literally just Google meme generator. It'll bring you to a little thing. You pick your picture, you type in some text, and Bob's your uncle. It's great. Mm-hmm. What a world we live in. And Lord of
Memes are not
Hats
just
Meme are
relegated to
open
the
all.
super talented anymore.
Yes. Memes for all. And Lord of Hats asked, does it need to be a specific format? Does not necessarily require a specific format. Just the theme is chaos tokens, chaos pulls, skill tests, that sort of thing. So that's really the only stipulation. So get those in February 14th. Moving on from there. Well, let's hop into our Patreon news. Ian, what do we got this time?
Okay, so first off, thanks to our board members, Chris, Cyclos, Alexander, Ian, and Dave. And I guess one note on that is we've had a limit of 5 on that particular tier, but we are going to be opening that up soon. So if you're looking to get into that tier, as a reminder, what that tier gets you is access to our special event swag, what we're making for Gen Con this year, which is awesome. And anything we make for Arkham Knights. Basically, if you're not able to make those events, we will ship those to you at the $20 level. So we're going to open up a few more spots of those in the next couple of weeks. But we'll remind you next week, next episode, that is, as well.
And then, of course, it also gets you all of the perks up to that level, which includes your own title at Mythos Busters Incorporated, which we went through the whole spiel of episode 50 without kind of realizing, like, hey, why haven't we given our board members titles yet? So
they were just the mysterious board at first, and then now they're actually getting their assigned responsibilities.
Yeah, but we were just using them for their money before, and now we've actually got the papers filed, 401k is all good. They can start their duties.
Yeah, they gotta have those official titles just for tax purposes. Special shout out to our random patron this time is for Spencer Drake. And I have to say, Spencer, if you're not a 1920s, 1940s detective or private eye, you should be with that name. Because Spencer Drake, isn't that a great investigator name?
It sure is. It sounds like a pulpy PI with, heart of gold type character.
Yeah, totally. Could totally pal around with Joe Diamond for sure. So we're gonna roll out. Speaking of the board members, we're gonna roll out a couple of their job titles. So for our good friend Dave Stokes is going to be the director of Limes and Redcoats.
Yes, he is, as always.
And our job title for Cyclos is Director of Fortunes and Taros Law Audits, which is quite appropriate for the Circle Undead. Other than that, just again a reminder that we're going to have a special event at Gen Con this year. Keep your eye out for that. We'll give more details as we get closer to Gen Con.
Oh, and one more I wanted to drop, just because he's actually here tonight. Hey, Chris. Chris Basie is our lead procurer of spirits and geists.
Mm-hmm. Now, are those spirits like drinking spirits, or spirits as in Ghostbusters spirits?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
All right. So I think the other thing that we wanted to mention, we did the big intro for episode 50, which was hopefully a lot of fun for people who were patrons and were able to kind of be a part of that. We've got something, kind of a little supplement to that coming up. So pay attention to that on our Facebook and Instagram. And that'll be coming out soon. We've got another fun little tag for our patrons.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, guys, I think one of the only other things we want to check in on would be Gen Con, as that is always imminent, despite the fact that it's February 1st as we record this. So, Ian, I know we haven't fully confirmed time, place, that sort of thing, but have we confirmed where we're shooting for our event that people should just kind of earmark if they want to try to show up?
No.
Okay.
we should probably do that, but I
think
know
we normally
usually
try
do
to get
it
it like Saturday afternoon, right?
Yeah, it's usually in the afternoon. I think it's been around 1-ish or so keeping those times free. Again, if people we haven't said it yet, so if you really want to go, and obviously we can't schedule for 30, 40 people. But if you really know, like, oh, I have this tournament or event on this at this time and I want to go but I can't make it, feel free to send us an email and we'll take that into consideration if we can.
Excellent. Yeah, so I think maybe given the nature of our swag this year, do you think maybe earlier is better? Maybe we'd shoot for Friday afternoon?
Could be, yeah. We'll convene and discuss.
Yeah. Now, I promise we'll have that hammered out by the time we record next time. And the other thing that we will for sure have a time slot for is After Dark again. This will be After Dark 4? Have we done it 4 years now? Huh. 4? It's either 4 or 5. But anyway, it's our post-mortem that we do at the Slippery Noodle Inn. Party games, beers, great food, fun atmosphere. We get our own gaming basement to do it in, and it is fantastic. Mm-hmm. It's always what I look forward to. It's definitely the highlight of Gen Con for me. It's when we get to see everyone. Almost everyone.
Yeah.
All right, so okay, so I know this one's a little tough, but we kind of we have a duty to cross-pollinate here. So that other podcast, Drawn to the Flame, is throwing an event called Arkham in Flames. I know we've mentioned this kind of in passing in the past, but I wanted to actually give people real information. So this is going to be a fan-run celebration for the LCG, specifically run by Peter and Frank from Drawn to the Flame. This is going to be in the UK at Dark Sphere in Waterloo, which, as I understand it, is a neighborhood of London? I don't know how UK addresses work.
So? I think there's 5 billion neighborhoods in London, so probably.
Yeah. As I understand it, London's a little bit of a sprawl. So anyway, this is happening on March 9th and 10th, I believe. So anyway, they're getting together to play the game. They've got some quizzes. They're doing some Labyrinths of Lunacy multiplayer, lots of other things. The one thing I do have to call them out on, though, for just blatant plagiarism on their last episode, they mentioned that they were going to do a Depths of Yoth standalone challenge, which, come on, guys. How low can you go? We've been talking about this forever. So I guess all I would ask Peter and Frank is that you use the proper name and just a little bit of credit. A little bit of treatment. That's fine.
I believe the event is BYOB, Bring Your Own Baby.
I believe that's what I've been told. Too. Yeah, anyway. It's right here in the event details. Look at that, BYO Baby. So anyway, if you're interested and able to get to such a thing, if you're over in the Europes, because apparently if you live anywhere in Europe, it's just it's like across the block, right, to get to the UK.
Sure.
That's how I understand it. You can go to eventbrite.co.uk and search Arkham in Flames, and that's where you can buy tickets, get information on it, and otherwise check it out. But seriously, fuck those guys. Okay, so I think that's all the business we had to take care of. Guys, let's bring it back for a second. Let's get a little casual. Mm-hmm. Ian, what have you been playing recently? Any campaigns going on?
Well, I've been burdened with a little bit of sickness as I cough up my lungs here and there on this episode. But I have managed to get some games in because I knew Circle Undone was coming out, so I really wanted to power through a Return to Dunwich campaign, which I did with Min and Agnes. And that was a pairing. I basically picked that pairing because I haven't played either in a bit since Carcosa. Yeah. And I have never paired them together, so I wanted to see how it went. And it went. It was up and down campaign. Undimensioned and Unseen was the low point where I had to resign without getting a single brood because it was just the perfect storm of encounter cards. But ultimately,
RNGesus did not smile on you.
No, not at all. But ultimately, they made it through to the last scenario, and Agnes got knocked out halfway through Lost in Time and Space, but Min was able to pull out a victory thanks to basically it was coming down to the end without spoiling too much of that scenario, but I was in one location stuck with 2 enemies, and anyone who's played Min knows she's not a great evader. But thankfully I had 1 stroke of luck, so evaded 1, and then I was 1 up on the second evade and drew a +1. So managed to evade both, and then she could move out and get to the exit location. So basically it's one of those moments where everything came down to 1 pool.
And in those moments, and kind of related to what you're saying, I don't think I hear enough love out there for Stroke of Luck. Mm-hmm. That is such a clutch card when you need something done.
Yeah, and I basically took it right before Lost in Time and Space. I had like 4 XP available, and I was pretty happy with Min's kit by that point, and I saw thinking about what could I include, and I settled on Stroke of Luck because like it's the end of the campaign. You know, I can use them and exile them at will because it doesn't matter at that point. And I had a feeling there'd probably be 1 or 2 tests that I was just really going to need to pass. So
I think that's a pretty safe assumption if you play Arkham Horror the card game.
Yeah, I think. I mean, in general, I think it's a good card, but I really like it as like an upgrade right before the last scenario of a campaign too. If you're just trying to think of what's gonna come up clutch for you.
Yeah, or standalone. Like
yeah, for sure.
Great little card. I too
have.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna finish by saying it was a fun Min build. It wasn't anything too crazy like that other people haven't done, but I did the art student and also lab assistant because I was just trying to build the most draw I could. So between lab assistant and preposterous sketches and something else,
cryptic research, I would assume.
I believe so. Yeah, I was basically drawing.
Surely not feed the mind.
No, not feed the mind. But I was drawing through my deck at least once per game, which also meant in Dunwich I had to take a. Oh God, what is it called? Devil's Luck. To counter against Beyond the Veil.
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of your story, Ian. Was this a true solo game?
No, it was Min and Agnes.
Right, I knew that.
I'm not talking about Agnes much because she did Agnes things and she was great at handling enemies, but I forgot how kind of enemy light Dunwich can be at times compared to after playing Forgotten Age a ton. It's weird. It comes in spurts. Like you'll have a ton of enemies, but then I would find, because I didn't put any like clue stuff in Agnes because I figured Min would handle it. Like I had so many turns where Agnes just didn't really have anything to do except like draw cards, gather resources.
I find in 2-player, even when I'm like playing Rex and Mark, you know, just like the min-maxi of min-maxiest. Like in 2-player, it's usually worth it to put a little bit of both in both investigators because sometimes the cards just don't spit out exactly what you need to specialize.
Yeah, if I could do it over again, I would put some in Agnes, like newspaper level 2, something like that.
Yeah, so speaking of Agnes, I too did return to Dunwich, leading up to the Circle Undone being released. I decided to take a slight dalliance with True Solo and give Dunwich the ability to redeem itself. So I did solo Agnes through Dunwich, and of course I've completely learned a lot more about solo than I knew back when my original Fateful Agnes solo campaign happened. So sure. I think the solo Agnes deck that I have is pretty solid. Like it ran through the first 4 or 5 scenarios kind of without a whole lot of problem. Undimensioned and Unseen got hairy. And I was on my last leg, but I got all the broods, so I'm still pretty happy with that.
Nice.
My problem was... Do you see this coming? Does anyone want to guess? Where Doom Awaits... man, the fact that I started with that conglomeration of spheres... just in solo, I keep forgetting how taxing that is. In solo. Thanks, Nick.
Not a problem.
Posting episode 18, Salty by Nature. No, but see, can you hear the lack of salt in my voice, despite the fact that you guys all know that this is leading to a loss?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely not the same.
Anyway, so I ran that through. I managed to get a shriveling out. I had to use 3 charges on the spheres, and then just kind of got enemy flooded. You know, I pulled what's the lupine thrall, and then I pulled an avian thrall. So I pulled like 4 enemies in the first 6 turns, and the last one was a Shogoth.
Nice.
So, you know, I made it into the altered location. So I made it up past the base of the hill, and I was well on my way to getting up to Sentinel Peak. But eventually, I just succumbed to the swinginess of luck that just is part and parcel to true solo.
Yeah.
So again, I suppose it's just fate at this point. Agnes did not make it up the hill, and Azathoth became one with all reality. But that said, man, I am really digging the changes they made with Return.
Yep. Yeah.
Agreed.
I particularly Essex. Like Essex is still gonna Essex, but the extra agenda in general, and the things that come as a result of that, I was like, yes, this should have been here from the beginning, and I'm so happy it's here now. But anyway,
and with my experience with Essex, the 2 times that I played it, the 2 new locations both ended up being my first 2, just in different orders. So I'm always starting Return to Essex like, this is awesome! And then usually by about Agenda 3 or 4, I'm like, I'm done with this. Or rather, the scenario's like it's done with me, but... Yeah. But no, great changes overall. I really do love the new Dunwich.
Yeah, I would say Return to the Night of the Zealot. I would say if I ever go to play Night of the Zealot, I probably will never play the vanilla version again. Like the changes I all liked, but I wasn't really blown away by them. I didn't come off of that campaign going like, oh my god, these things they changed. But
I don't know. I remember thinking the Gathering was really cool. The new Gathering, that one was awesome.
Because they turned it into a big boy scenario.
Yeah, and then the other 2 just kind of felt like a variant, but didn't really do anything too different. So,
But I would say the Dunwich, I feel like, is a step up from that, where I'm kind of off of that first campaign of Dunwich. I started a new one right before Circle Drop, so who knows when I'll get back to that. But I came off of that first one going like, yeah, I'll play that again. Just there's enough changed and enough new cards to make it feel new, and just I am very positive on it, even though my frickin' Agnes lost and Where Doom Awaits again. What I will say is at least new Where Doom Awaits let me play. Like I gave it a good go. I just lost.
Well, and I find that Where Doom Awaits in my experience is the one, like Ian talked about how Dunwich can be pretty dry on enemies, but Where Doom Awaits to me seems like the scenario that always ends up being either a drought of enemies or a flood. Like, I've never had it where I'm like, this is a reasonable amount of enemies in that scenario. It's always been one or the other.
Right. 100% agree, and you know why I think that is? It's that encounter deck is like the fattest damn encounter deck in this game. It's like, it felt like a Lord of the Rings player deck. That thing has to be at least 50 cards. Yeah. Just insane. So, I mean, it's kind of cool because it's really variant from play to play. But, you know, as mentioned, it's really variant from play to play, and that comes with its own pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I liked about the experience is because we've also gotten lots of cards since Dunwich that are hard counters to things like Beyond the Veil or the Whippoorwills. Mm-hmm. So it was fun playing through having my special counters for those things, while also, like, the encounter deck has adapted as well and is bringing new stuff that I don't know. So that was a fun, like, mix of experience. Like, I know what you're going to do next, but then all of a sudden it pulls out something new.
That was definitely a thing that I felt for Beyond the Veil. Like, it's still a threat. You still have to play around it. But at least now you're playing around it, as opposed to, I feel like when Dunwich first came out, we were just like, avoid drawing at all costs.
Yeah.
Save your wards of protection.
Timer at that point. Like, once you draw it, it's like, okay, I have this many turns till I die.
Yeah. And I do enjoy the fact that you're actually kind of, there's a little bit of maneuvering happening now, so. And then as well, I have to say, and I have to mention, and no spoilers for anyone who's worried about it, but I took a half day at work today, and I mini Iron Man. I binged the prologue and the scenarios. I completed the whole Circle Undone box in one 6-hour sitting.
Your pacing is terrible.
Well, no. Okay, so here's the thing.
Pick it up for Iron Man.
I was thinking about that too. I'm like, God damn, why is this taking so long? And it kind of came to me that, well, okay, by the third or fourth time through a campaign, you just know setup, and you're just able to do it. And okay, this card goes here, this card goes here, blah 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 blah, and you just. But the first time you set up a scenario, and now I kind of get why some people complain about the setup time for Arkham, because those people are probably the people who don't play it ad nauseum like I do. It takes a while. Like, we had to sit there going, okay, so this goes here, and okay, these encounter sets that, the symbols I'm not familiar with yet, so I'm not like, I know, there's just a lot to take in when a new box drops, and it took me 6 hours to get through it. But what I will say, again, without spoilers, is, oh my god, that was probably one of the better sessions of Arkham that I've had, including our Iron Man sessions, which I am just such a big fan of. Like, this box, I was blown away by how good it is. Like, it hits so many themes that are just favorites of mine. Obviously, I was able to play as Diana, and that is a perk, but I knew that was coming. And then Justin, who I played through it with, our administratomancer, he played Preston, so we played kind of the thematic Lodge, Silver Twilight Lodge duo. And I'll tell you what, guys. Preston was I would say, the investigator in that box that confused me most when we took it, when we first previewed it and looked at it. And even after opening the box and seeing the cards that he gets that kind of play with him, I'm still just like, this guy just does not seem like he should work. And Justin built a deck for him, and Justin is a fine player, but I think even he would admit he's not like an expert deck builder. He didn't like come in with some grand strategy. He just built a deck on the fly while we were sitting there looking at it. And Preston pulled some damn weight. Like, nice. In the first scenario, I had like a god opening hand for Diana, and just I was a goddess. I was an invincible goddess.
Which is what, 6 cancels?
It's cancels. It's an early stat boost, and it's the knife. Oh, that knife. If you can get that knife out early, things are just going to be okay. And he did fine in that first scenario, but then the second scenario, oh man, even with an aggressive mulligan, I just didn't pull into the right pieces at the right time, and I had a real rough time with Diana, just kind of sputtering. That 35-card deck makes a difference, and I kind of had, well, again, without spoilers here, I had a couple of extra cards added to that already fat deck. So the consistency is just kind of something I'm navigating at this point. So the second scenario, I sputtered, and Preston was there to just be like, "Bae, I got you." Just paying for everything, zipping around the board with double elusives, just like, I'm a believer now. I'm excited to try him out for myself.
Yeah, I've played through the prologue and the first scenario last night with Joe Diamond solo. And first off, Joe Diamond is as good as we all predicted solo. Although his low will, that's funny that I'm saying this, his low will coupled with a low agility is more of a problem than you might think at first glance. But it still doesn't stop him from, like, he can blaze through things really fast. I think I got through the first scenario pretty quick. We talk a lot about player cards on Mythos Busters, but I'm also a player who really enjoys encounter card design. And I have to say I'm really pleased with, like, how, again, Matt is able to craft something that, like, you could immediately, if someone just dropped this scenario on you blind, you'd know that it's not part of any of the other cycles because the encounter cards are doing something specific and it's creative. It's stuff we haven't seen before. Yep. It's not like just trotting out the same effects with different names. So
or higher numbers.
I'm looking for. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I'm excited to play the second scenario.
Well, and I'm one of those asshole players who the only time I talk about encounter cards is when they're not working for me. I mean, you guys know this. But this campaign really made me stop and go like, damn, this is some like, it's annoying and I hate it right now, but this is some really cool shit going on.
Yeah.
So anyway, not to stoke the flames, because I know a lot of people with the weather and whatnot are not able to get a hold of Circle Undone as soon as they were hoping. But if this campaign continues as strong as it started, this is going to usurp Carcosa as my favorite campaign. Like I'm just ready to say that already. But anyway, yeah, Nick, I'm
Wait
excited.
till you hit Scenario 5.
And
Scenario 5 just usually ends up being the sticking point for a lot of campaigns. Or 4, I guess. 4, because that's Boundary and that's Essex.
well, you know, a lot of shows really suffer from that mid-season sag, so we'll see how it goes. All right. Well, Nick, what have you been playing?
Return to Dunwich. I started 2 solo campaigns, one with Solo Jim, and one with... Who was my first one now? I can't remember. Oh my gosh, it wasn't even that long ago. Solo Jim and Solo someone else. And then my wife and I are continuing our 2-player campaign through The Forgotten Age. We have hit a bit of a speed bump with City of Archives, of all things. Simply because she's playing Finn and I'm playing Akachi, so that means she has a lot of agility icons in her deck and I have a lot of will icons in my deck, but we don't have, like, intellect icons to get the investigations done, and you know, the combat stuff is really throwing us for a loop. So that one has we've come close on the second try, because I asked her after we finish, and I haven't read any of the resolution stuff, so she doesn't know what's coming. But after we finish playing it, I'm like, do you want to try it again, or do you want to just end the campaign and do something else? Because we get doomed out every time. And she keeps wanting to try it again, so I think she appreciates what the scenario is doing, but at this point, she just wants to get to the next one. So, I'm excited to see if we finish it, and then if one of us turns to a Yithian for the rest of the campaign. I think that'd be pretty exciting. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Just the 2-player TFA and the 2 solo Dunwich campaigns until I can get my hands on Circle Undone.
Excellent. Oh, I'm excited for you to gush with us next time. Or, well, assuming next time you have Circle Undone already.
Well, that's the goal.
Okay, well, guys, let's move it into the news. We don't have a flood this time, so we can actually kind of luxuriate and take our time a little bit. So, Ian, what we got?
Yeah. Okay, so our news this time around is the announcement of a new Mythos pack entitled Union and Disillusion, and this is the 4th Mythos pack in the Circle Undone cycle. This one is taking us to the Unvisited Isle, which, if you're not up on your Arkham lore, that's an island in the middle of the Miskatonic River that people don't go to. So it's a place that I've always has been, like, fascinating to me. Just, you know, that simple trope of, like, the place that no one goes. So we got a few player cards spoiled as part of this pack. The first one up is Warning Shot. So why don't you read this blue card, Nick?
Sure thing. Warning Shot is a Guardian event. It costs 2 resources. It is level 0. It has a combat and an agility skill icons. It's tactic and trick traded, and its game text reads, as an additional cost to play Warning Shot, spend 1 ammo from a firearm asset you control. Move all non-elite enemies at your location to a connecting location. This action does not provoke attacks of opportunity. I really like this card. I think...
Oh, hey, Mark can take it. It's a tactic.
Oh, Jesus. I think that this probably belongs more in a Guardian off-class deck. Like, when I saw this, I thought Skids immediately. And I still think it's a pretty strong tool for Skids. But, like, when I think about my solo Roland build, I don't know if this is one I would necessarily make room for. But I also think that in any 3 or 4 player game, your blue player is going to be taking this. So
I can say that even in 2 players, now granted, my Diana doesn't run any firearms, but if she had, if, like, this was a trick that she could get, like, there are many situations where even in 2 player, this would have been, like, a godsend. So, it's really interesting because your ammo's precious for a Guardian generally.
Well, it's not as
pretty good
precious as it
effect.
was. I mean, it is precious, but there are a lot of tools now to stack those ammo tokens on there.
That's true.
And I think that if you like, what's the sweet spot? 2 enemies, 3 enemies, probably 2. Right?
If you can
I think
scatter
it's-
two, if you can scatter 2 enemies on this, I'd be happy with that.
right? And you get to choose where they go, so you could send them to a location that is advantageous for you. Maybe you're moving away from that next turn, or even if they're not hunters, and you can just get rid of them. Like if they're those snakes in TFA, you can just send them to a location and they just sit there.
Yorick could like send them into a trap.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, totally.
Yep. Or
So, yeah,
set
there's
up a
some fun-
dynamite.
hmm
That's a build I'm gonna have to. Yeah, that seems just the right level of jank. That is like right in my wheelhouse. I must explore this.
Yeah, I like the idea if there's like a pack of enemies even, and like say it's the next location. So you could hop in there, warning shot them away, and then go back to where you were, and it's kind of like buying you some space. And I do like it's a way, it's not an evade, but it's kind of a pseudo evade, doing something similar. Like I could see for someone like Leo who has very low agility that I might want something like this in my back pocket.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Cool card.
Go ahead.
I mean, let's talk about for a fact that this game is cool enough that, like, here's a card that's like, hey, you know those firearms that have mostly just had one use this entire game? Like, here's a completely different thing you can now do with it.
Yeah.
Do we have an investigator who can take tricks? I feel like that's a trait
Rita.
that has been targeted.
Rita can.
Okay,
so
so you could partner this with what? Old hunting rifle?
Old hunting rifle, yeah. The good thing is,
Get a
I
use
think
out of
even if you're old hunting rifle jams, you could still do this, right?
Yeah, because I think that just cancels its starting, like its
Right.
top action on that
Yeah.
card. But I don't think that this would fit. I don't think this is a Rita card. I think that was just
What
a joke.
firearms can she take?
Old,
Old
hunting,
hunting
rifle.
rifle.
That's
Yeah,
it?
that's it.
That's
Yep.
it.
Oh, yeah. I don't think you include this if you've got one firearm in your deck, even if you've
I
got
don't
2 copies.
Well, and I don't think an investigator who benefits from evading would take something that actively removes enemies from their location. So,
that's probably
Yeah.
also true.
If it evaded them, then it might be interesting.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah.
Well, wait for level 2 version, right?
Yep.
No, that's
okay.
leg shot, I suppose.
That's
Sure.
Leg shot,
what? Oh,
not warning shot.
kneecaps.
Yep. You'll live.
The next card is Esoteric Atlas, and you can read this one, Shell.
Oh, can I? Excellent. Esoteric Atlas is a level 1 Seeker asset. It's 3 cost, has an agility pip, has item and tome traits, and uses 4 secrets. More secrets, guys. Secrets.
Secret tech.
Action, spend 1 secret and exhaust Esoteric Atlas. Choose a revealed location that is exactly 2 connections away and move... 2 connections away from your location. Move to that location. And then this takes up a hand slot. This one's interesting.
It's tricky. Yeah, it's really tricky because it takes up that hand slot, which, granted, for most seekers isn't that big of a deal. But it requires the location to be revealed. It has to be exactly 2 connections away, so it's efficient because you're moving 2 for 1. Casey in chat brings up, is it better than Pathfinder? I still love Pathfinder a lot, because that's free action, exhaust, move. But this one's really tough. Like, I don't know how to grade this card without actually playing with it. I think this one
is super map dependent, isn't it?
Yes, it's your get out of
Yeah.
jail card. Like, this is the one that you use to get back to Peter Clover. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure. Or
So-
Doom of Esley, like zipping through,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, like if you've got one test that you need to hit, it's like spend a secret. Oh no, this is exhaust. Never mind.
right, exactly.
Combo broken.
Yeah.
It makes it tough too that it's a revealed location, because I was thinking,
Yes.
oh, this would be cool in that Ursula build we were trying to do where we move ahead, but it has to be a location that's already revealed.
Yeah, I think that this is a metagame card. This is one you only bring if you know what to expect in the scenario.
Or if you're Daisy, because it's a tome.
Yep. So you could get a free move with Daisy, although it's a niche conditional move.
Yeah.
No, but okay, but think about this. If you're using it to zip past an enemy, which is a thing, like you can just move one location in the opposite direction. If like say your placement is no, hear me out. Like you can if your placement isn't perfect and you need to get there, you can move one location in the opposite direction and then trigger this, and then you can still like I think there's a little bit more nuance here than is initially apparent.
So you evade the enemy first, then you move one away. So you spend your whole turn to move one location without bringing that. I think Daisy has better tools to deal with that enemy.
No, I'm saying like if she's got one sitting in her next location and she needs to get somewhere else, can't move through the enemy because she doesn't have a way to deal with it. This would be an interesting way to zip around it, but.
I still think I'll agree that it might have a place in Daisy, but I think it's still. Its big issue is that it's just map dependent. It's scenario dependent. More so than most other Daisy cards.
So then I think you want to look at this one maybe a little bit harder in standalone when you know what you're up against.
Yes, that's what I was going for.
It might be interesting thinking of possible jank. Like, we are getting more and more cards that let you discover clues at locations other than your own, or move clues.
Like Vantage Point? The card everyone loves?
So maybe like you do this weird thing where you like move ahead just to reveal locations, and then you zip back with the Atlas to get out of danger, and then you use those various cards to like grab those clues from locations that you've revealed. Something like that.
Sean, have you seen my solo Roland build that uses Vantage Point?
No.
I'll link that here in a little bit.
I could see a justification for it there, actually. Okay. I don't want to dive too far into it. There were 2 points that made me argue against Vantage Point on the last episode. One was I just don't think it's that needed in a team that is just going to be good at investigating anyway. The Shroud just doesn't do much for you. 2, I was just surprised at how hard you guys defended it. Which made me resist even harder. But I don't hate Vantage Point, and in Rolo, that seems okay.
I found the deck.
Rolo.
Look at it at your leisure.
Surely I'm not the first person to say Rolo.
No,
okay.
Yeah,
okay. I've definitely heard Sola, but now we add Rolo to the collection.
Okay, all right, there it is, right there in the deck list. 2 of them even. Wow. Okay.
All right, we can move on to Decoy.
Okay, we will move on to the green card. This is Decoy, a 2-cost event, level 0, 2 agility pips, favor and service traded. Sadly, no trick trait for Rita. Automatically evade a non-elite enemy at your location. Reaction: when you play Decoy, increase its cost by 2. Change a non-elite enemy to up to 2 non-elite enemies. And there's a second reaction: when you play Decoy, increase its cost by 2. Change at your location to add a location up to 2 connections away.
What is this card?
I really like this design that it's like a menu of options.
Yes, I was going to say, one of my favorite things, to reference Magic again, I would never do, but anyway, one of my favorite things about Magic was when they incorporated kicker costs, which is when you play this spell, you can pay an additional mana cost to get additional effects. I love that built-in adaptability, and I love seeing that in this, because it gives me hope that we'll see more cards that do that.
Okay. 2 cost, double iconed event. If this said automatically evade a non-elite enemy at your location, full stop, I'd still like this card.
Sure.
Like, all of a sudden, Leo can just be like, hey, I can evade it just about anything right now. This seems really good. I've yet to try it, obviously, but I was surprised. Automatically, no test, no nothing, just evade.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially good for those alert enemies, or a lot of times I'm spending 2 anyway to bump for Streetwise. So maybe I just want to spend 2 to do it automatically without a chance of failure, especially if the Chaos Bag sucks. and I'm trying to avoid tokens, or if it's hard or expert, etc. The kicker effects are nice. Evading up to 2 is definitely good, and hitting a location up to 2 connections away, that might be useful if you just really want to get away from a certain enemy, like a hunter enemy, or if you want to breeze past them, something like that.
Well, and it's so much better than just having a higher costed event that did all of that automatically, because that would be...
Right.
Those are such niche situations that, it'd be like, why is this card even... Why does it even exist? But because it's split up into... No, it's literally pay what you want. Like, this is rogue
a la carte.
It's like the GoFundMe of rogue cards. Like, it's so cool.
Rogue is the GoFundMe faction, so it just fits.
No, Survivor is the GoFundMe faction.
No, Survivor is the Carrying Bridge faction.
Fair. That's fair. I'll concede that.
I know there has been commentary, like I mentioned at the beginning, that there's no trick trait for Rita to access, which would be nice for her. And on the surface, you think this should have the trick trait, but I think because the flavor is like you're paying an actual decoy to go off and like attract the attention. Like, you're not doing a trick yourself, you're paying some decoy to distract the enemies.
Which that's a fun little flavor spin.
Mm-hmm.
Puts it in Preston's court.
Yeah, for sure. This is great for Preston, who, is dealing with that one evade that he can just pay to make an enemy go away and evade it, for sure. Yeah, I like it. I hope we see more cards with this design.
Yeah, I like the scalable effects. That's really cool. And you see things like Contraband, where it's like this big bomb effect, and if all the things fall in the right place at the right time, it's great. But if one link in that chain is weak, then the whole thing is just... That's why not too many investigators look at level 0 Contraband. So I love building in this direction.
Mm-hmm.
Basic effect, basic cost.
Yeah. I think because one final thing is just... I could see someone comparing this to Elusive and saying, well, for 2, I could just teleport somewhere and disengage from an enemy anyway. But there are certain cases where it actually matters if you evade an enemy, especially in multiplayer.
Oh, hell yeah.
That there's a difference between, like, it's doing something different, so I don't think you can just straight up compare the two.
Nerds still will, though.
As they do. That's about it for the player card spoilers.
So can we work out the click cost of this thing real quick? If you full effect, what you're...
I'm not even taking that bait, because there's another player card spoiler in this article. They just didn't have it in that little like clicky thing where you like go through and look at all the pictures. It's actually just buried in the text. So guys, let me guide you to this card.
Oh yeah, I forgot about this one. That's my bad.
Me too. How fitting that it's hidden from us.
Yes.
So, Guiding Spirit is a level 1 survivor asset. It costs 1, it has a willpower icon. It's an ally and a Geist. Guys, we are getting our ghost ally finally. It's happening. You get +1 intellect. Non-direct horror must be assigned to Guiding Spirit before it can be assigned to your investigator card. And after Guiding Spirit is defeated by horror, exile it. It takes up an ally slot and has 3 sanity to soak.
3 sanity for 1 cost is pretty damn good.
And just a straight static +1 intellect.
Yeah.
And guys, I don't know how often you're playing like Survivors through a whole campaign, but by the end of a campaign, I am trying to find things to spend my experience on. So like,
oh yeah,
a bomb card that costs me 1 XP that exiles if it manages to overflow. I'm super okay with that. And I will say again, we've gotten our ghost ally. It's happening. Now the art in... is there anyone who can take this and stand together?
Calvin.
Beautiful. And that works so well, because the stand together art just kind of looks like Calvin with spectacles on.
You think everybody looks like Calvin, though.
I was waiting for someone.
But I'm gonna pull up the art for Stand Together. It is not. That does no. Now that I'm actually looking at it, that does not look anything like Calvin at all.
I mean, he's a dude.
Not even close.
I thought you were gonna say he has suspenders, which that'd be better than last time when you said the guy on Cornered had, or On Your Own rather.
Okay, so maybe I just want to see Calvin in more art, and I'm projecting. Let's go with that.
I do too. Like, I'm gonna be honest. I do. I want to see Calvin in cards because I'll be like, oh, this is a Calvin card, because I want him to work better than my experience with him.
All right, now we're done with that.
Didn't
article.
mean to kill it. Sorry, guys.
And then I think so. Moving on from news, that was the only one we had, right? Nothing else dropped like at the last minute.
No, that was it.
Not that I saw.
I skipped over community highlights this week. Nick, what we got?
This week, I wanted to... It's a blog that we've talked about in the past, but I wanted to redirect everybody's attention to it because recently I gave the author of this blog community content privileges on our Discord, so he's now able to post to our community content channel regularly. But it is the Behind the Veil blog by Ian McAllister. He's written some guest articles for the Mythos Busters website early on in our tenure, and now his most recent article is about Black Star's Rise. He does these really in-depth analyses
Is correct.
of scenarios. And that is his most recent is Black Star's Rise. I linked it in our show notes and in the Discord. So check it out, leave comments, let him know your thoughts. And thank you, Ian, for producing such wonderful content for this game.
I like how many rising stars we helped, or at least who started with us. I don't want to say we helped because they completely made themselves, but
yes,
the fact that they picked us to kind of start sharing their content before moving on to their own thing, and I'm counting you guys drawn to the flame. It just makes me happy. It makes me happy. The other thing I wanted to mention, it's not recent. It's actually a little bit old-ish. Like, was it? Anyway, okay, so there was a deck building guide for newer players that we published. Was it at the beginning of January, Nick?
Oh my gosh, you're right. I can't believe I missed talking about that. Oh,
We're bad with our show notes sometimes, which is, I just wanted to bring it back around. It got some really good traction on Reddit when Croker, who wrote the article, posted it there, and it's a fantastic new player's deck building guide. Nick, you might have more things to say about it.
No, that's pretty much what it is. No questions asked. It's a very good analysis of steps that you should think about and how you should consider cards and everything like that when it comes to building your deck. So I'm definitely going to add that to the show notes this week. Thank you so much for remembering that, Sean.
Yeah. So, honestly, we need to... And this is probably a conversation we'd be having offline, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it anyway. But we should probably think about adding like a new player section to our website where we can kind of compile a lot of these guides, because this is something I would point a new player to in a second. So anyway, if you just like reading about deck building theory or have a new player or are a new player, go ahead and check this out. It's called Feed the Mind is the title of the article, and it's on mythosbusterspodcast.wordpress.com. And again, thank you to Croker for writing it. If you have an article stewing in your mind, or brewing, or steeping, or cooking, whatever is your preferred method of preparation, we're happy to publish it, and I think I don't know, I feel like we should prop this a little bit more, because we've got some really good articles just kind of sitting on our website. Yeah. This has made me think. We're going to make this a thing again. So anyway, contact us if you've got such a thing that you'd like to write. You can pitch it to us ahead of time if you feel like it. Otherwise, if you want to just drop an article on us, Nick or Ian is happy to edit it and post it on our website. Just go ahead and contact us at mythosbusterspod@gmail.com. Okay, boys. Scott's not here, so we're going to skip over rules PSAs. Let's move into our main discussion topics, which is, in fact, itself going to be split into several different topics. So we've got some really cool listener-submitted questions that we want to run through. I'm trying to remember at this point which of these are voicemails that we actually have to edit in and which of these were submitted to us via the website. I probably should have checked on that ahead of time. So the first one I want to run into here
guest host.
Yep, guest. Was that Roland?
No.
Was that Joaquin?
Okay.
We really need
like
to
it
get the
better
kids
be.
on the podcast nowadays. It's going to be a thing. So this question comes from Tim, who wrote us at the Gmail. So hi all, I'd love an episode where you guys discuss the differences between each of the player counts. So Tim usually only plays 2-player, but is interested in our thoughts on how the game changes for 1, 3, and 4 players, and whether there's a big difference between 3 and 4. And I think this is a fascinating topic, and not one that gets a whole lot of discussion, because I feel like a lot of people kind of have a very tight wheelhouse. Like, you're generally either a solo player who occasionally branches out into multiplayer, or you play a lot of multiplayer like me and just kind of dip your toe into true solo from time to time. So kind of opening this up, guys, do you think there is a big difference between the different player counts? And if so, why?
I think, obviously, between solo and multiplayer there is. Like, just that distinction. If it's one player or if it's more than one player, that's a big difference. Because of because of the encounter deck draws, and because of, like, amount of stuff going on the board, and the ratio of that compared to the investigator's ability to handle it. It forces you to build your deck differently. It forces you to value abilities and cards differently than you would in team play. So I definitely think that solo is incredibly deserving of like its own sort of consideration. When it comes to multiplayer, however, I think that it's weird because like 2-player and 4-player feel like their own beasts to me, but 3 feels like it's neither one nor the other, or it's a little bit of one and a little bit of the other. Like 3-player is kind of like the gray area, but 2-player it feels like solo plus to me, in that the board is still generally pretty manageable, and you don't have to worry about things spiraling out of control too much. Again, this is all in air quotes because, of course, it changes based on your investigators and your scenarios. And then 4-player that's the mob. That's when it's like we have a full party, and the encounter deck is bringing a full party against us, essentially, with the amount of cards that you're drawing every turn. And things can easily spiral out of control. And then 3-player is just kind of like the middle ground between those two. So I guess when I think of the big distinctions, it's 1-player, 2-player, and 4-player.
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar boat, that they kind of exist in these tiers in my mind. If I'm building a deck, that solo building is going to be a lot different than how I build my two-handed decks, which in turn is different. I kind of tend to lump 3 and 4 player together. I don't feel like I've noticed huge differences.
I feel like,
but it's also the player count that I've had the least experience with. So maybe the multiplayer players will tell me different. But I feel like 3 and 4 players kind of a similar tier where I'll build decks in a similar way. But I guess that's kind of the 3 divisions for me, that you approach each of those player counts differently.
And I think, kind of adding on to what both of you are saying, the reason why is because in solo, you build your deck to handle a little bit of everything, and you kind of realize that everything that you're going to handle kind of has a spectrum of difficulty that you're going to run up against. You know, a lot of your enemies are going to be middling chumps. Occasionally you'll hit the big guy, or, you know, you have the story boss that you have to address, so you have to account for the fact that, okay, roughly X times per game, I have to hit these big tests. And that's why you have the investigators who are just inherently better at solo, because you've just got some investigators who have better tools to be able to flex and hit big tests in multiple areas. And then as you move into 2-player, those tests still exist, but you just get increasing flexibility as to where they can go. And that just kind of builds out from there. So when you hit 3 to 4 player, which I agree there's the least difference once you add that 4th player, though I do still hold that there is one. You get to the point where the game really, I feel, starts to reward specialization, because you're drawing 4 encounter cards per turn. Those big tests, those important treacheries that someone needs to address, or the high shroud locations, whatever it happens to be. the big enemies are coming out more often. The high shroud locations have more clues. It's just smarter and more efficient because of location and movement to have 1 or 2 players who specialize in that thing, and they're the person who goes and does that. Whereas in solo, you have to kind of account for everything. And it really plays into how you value cards differently.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, totally. I think that, to the game's credit, it scales incredibly well. Now,
Agreed.
Obviously, some scenarios do that better than others, but I think overall, the difficulty doesn't seem super oppressive in solo, and it doesn't seem like a cakewalk in 4-player. Like, it scales really well between all player counts. And that's really exciting to see that even still now into our 4th campaign, we're still seeing that strength of the bones of this game, that it's still holding up like that.
Yep. So, I mean, I know we've talked about these things kind of in general as we've done the podcast, but in solo, do you think there are any rules that apply that you don't think about when you go to multiplayer? True solo, 1 investigator.
That's what solo means. So that's,
I'm just clarifying.
No, like you said, I mean, I'm much more picky about which investigator I play in solo, and then from like not even just looking at their stat line or their abilities, but thinking about just the classes that they can include. Like that's one of the reasons why I play Roland so much, is because I play so much true solo, and in my mind, blue and yellow is still the best combination for true solo, because it handles the 2 active parts of the game that you need to do. But beyond that, as far as what you build your deck, or how you like cards you value, I mean, you're looking for efficiency first and foremost. You're looking for not necessarily testless stuff, but more like fast action stuff. Things that you can accomplishing more in 1 turn, I think is going to go further in solo than it would in 3 or 4 player.
I would agree with that 100%. And there's just less room for fluff and setup in solo because, as someone who plays Mystic, like the setup class, there are times where I'm like, God dang it, I need to get my shriveling out. And of course, now's when I would draw the enemy. If I'm in solo, I just have to deal with that. And that can be hard sometimes. But if I'm playing multiplayer, there's some space to be like, is there any way you can pull this off me? Can you evade it? Like, you can reach out to soften your rough spots. And, I like I said, I just think solo affords you less time to set up, to get ready. You just gotta be able to go.
Yeah, I think I pay a lot more attention to my setup and thinking about my opening hand and all that in true solo than otherwise. Like, I think you always have to think about it to some degree, but since you are all on your own, abandoned and alone, it's basically thinking about, like, if I draw an enemy in the second turn, what tools am I going to have to deal with it? If I have a 3 shroud, 4 shroud as my first location, how am I going to deal with that? And just kind of planning from there, which you're like including enough cards to be consistent enough that you're going to draw those in your opening hand. I guess there's just a lot less space to be cute about it in true solo. You kind of just really have to focus on that efficiency and make sure all your bases are covered.
Then as far as evaluating cards and thinking about what you include in your deck, anything that... Well, I think this applies maybe more on the clue side than the enemy side, but anything that like grabs 2 clues for some cost, like you look at that harder in solo, right? Like as a solo Mystic, you probably campaign dependent, investigator dependent, but I look a lot less hard at Rite of Seeking specifically in solo, just because like it's a big ask for resources. An arcane slot might end your turn prematurely. And a lot of locations, you might not even get the extra clue out of it. So the value proposition is different. Drawn to the Flame, same thing. Scene of the Crime, like you name it. Anything that is kind of overkill in solo specifically, you just kind of look at it differently. I mean, anyone can look at Stand Together and be like, oh, you don't play this in solo, but you do you value other cards in kind of a similar way when there's not, extra clues or more enemies. Like in 4-player, there's almost always going to be an enemy in play. unless you're running with Yorick and Leo in Carcosa. And then there will be turns where they just turn to paste and don't show up because they're scared.
Yeah, then enemy lifespan is measured in actions, not rounds. Yeah, I agree. Solo, and being the guy who just linked a solo deck build above, and I have double Scene of the Crime in it, but solo, like, you tend to think about those double clue grabbing cards a little bit harder. Now, the reason why to defend my own choice of having double Scene of the Crime is, like, to me, that's spend 2 resources to automatically succeed at an investigate test. So even if you're just grabbing 1 clue, something like that is great because it's still versatile and you don't have to test for it. But yeah, stuff like deduction, well, that's still an intellect boost, but maybe you go for a different intellect boost like Eureka rather than deduction, because deduction, you may not be pulling that second clue all the time. Which is,
or when you go to commit that test and you're like, this is what I have in my hand, maybe it's not the two clue location, but if you had Eureka, right. Who wouldn't like to draw a card?
Exactly. And it's interesting because I think for so long, I didn't really realize that until probably halfway through Forgotten Age, when I was like, there's not a lot of locations with 2 or more clues on them in solo. But early on, anything that grabbed multiple clues to me felt like you need that stuff, because that's part of the game. Like, that's the core of the game, is grabbing clues. But yeah, not necessarily in true solo. I think you can go a little lighter on that, like you said.
Okay, so then moving to 2-player, which is kind of my biggest wheelhouse. This is where I think the game, and like you said, Nick, the game scales beautifully. And, the fact that we play 4-player Iron Man all the time just shows that. But I think the game really kind of has its coolest sweet spot in 2-player, personally. Because you get to explore some of the multiplayer mechanics. You still kind of have to... I don't want to say have to. You can completely specialize in 2-player, and it can work. But then you run up against scenarios like Unspeakable Oath. And if you have 2 completely specialized investigators in Unspeakable Oath, that can end your campaign. That can just happen, because it just behooves you, I think, in 2-player, still to kind of have somewhat of the solo mindset where I'd like to be able to address a bit of everything. But you can lean one way or the other a little bit harder because you have that space to be like, hey, this happened, can you come take this enemy off me? Or, oh, I just revealed this location, it's got 5 shroud, I can't do that. Daisy, get over here. That sort of thing. And I think it's probably fair to say that the biggest difference in player counts, I feel like the difference gets smaller the more players you increase, right? So like the biggest difference between mindset is between 1 and 2 players. Would you guys say that's fair?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, when we started this, I said that to me the big player counts are 1, 2, and 4, and 3 is kind of in that middle ground. Mm-hmm. I think I still kind of hold to that, simply because 4-player allows you to do some crazy stuff.
That's true.
And as long as every investigator is handling their own board or their own play space, you can get away with a lot in 4-player, I feel, just speaking from our Iron Man experience. I think getting back to 2-player and specifically around deck building is that 2-player is a very cool place in deck building because of the things that you outlined, Sean, because you can explore those combos and those cool tricks and potentially use cards that maybe you otherwise wouldn't necessarily think about unless it's like a 4-player game. But at the same time, you still have to think about efficiency and clue grabbing and handling everything the scenario throws at you in 2-player. So I think that 2-player is the perfect play. Like, if you want to hone your skills as an overall Arkham deck builder, regardless of scenario, player count, or anything like that, 2-player is the perfect kind of place to explore that in, because it allows you to do some cute stuff, but it still forces you to pay attention to every element of the scenario.
Here. It grounds you in reality.
Well, not as much as solo does, but yes, it still keeps you grounded.
Solo grounds your face in reality.
Solo grinds you into reality, yes. And 2-player grounds you in reality.
Yeah, I do really like 2-player deck building and play a lot, just because it does open up a bit of that space and the tricky maneuvers that you don't get to do in solo, like figuring out, okay, I'm going to move here and peel this enemy off of you, and all that engagement shenanigans. I think the big difference between 2 and then moving to 3 and 4 is like in 2-player, like if you think about the big areas of the game as being enemy management and getting clues, like in 2-player you kind of have that neat division that you don't necessarily have to make, oh, this is my killer enemy manager and this is my clue getter. You can do that, and I've done that, but you can also make them well-rounded. But the point is, like, you need to make sure those 2 decks are really still, like, lasered in on those areas, whereas 3 and 4-player, I think that's where you can start to get a little weird. And, like, some of those support-type cards you can really lean into, like healing and, buffing other players with like encyclopedia, stuff like that. Again, not that
or like
you can't
level
use
0
that in
scrying, if I may dare.
Right. Like all those kind of effects that you just don't have room even in 2-player, because in 2-player you still got to focus on the main areas of the game. In 3 and 4-player those open up a bit, and like so you can even have a player that's just focused on just evading and things like that.
Yeah, and I agree 100%, Nick. Like if you're just looking to make yourself a well-rounded Arkham player, 2-player is where it's at. You get and like here's the other thing we haven't been talking about as much is the experience you get from the encounter deck. In solo, you can just have bad games that at no fault of your own you drew 3 enemies in the first 3 turns, and it's like, well, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Like solo just has those moments.
And conversely, too, in solo, you can have those instances where you're like, this scenario is a breeze, and then you go online and you're like, everybody thinks this scenario is killer, and you're like, I guess I drew the 3 cards that I could handle.
Do you have a specific example? Which scenario was this for you?
Doom of Edsley, I think when it first released, like when we were first getting into it, I played solo Leo, and I also didn't care about vengeance.
I was about to say, wasn't that your heavy vengeance campaign? That helps.
Yeah, that was my vengeance of like 20 or whatever, but yeah, I just blew my way through every enemy in that scenario, and I was like, why do people think this is hard? This is super easy. Just don't care.
But yeah, I would say the experience you have with the encounter deck gets more even the more players you have, because you see more of it. In higher player counts, it can get a little wonky because depending on where people are at, where enemies spawn, where the treacheries that attach to locations, that sort of thing. Location can really matter depending on where people are at, but I feel like you still get a more even experience the more players you have. But the other thing is, if the encounter deck has key combos or 1 or 2 nasty enemies or treacheries that you're really trying to avoid, in solo you can go whole campaigns where you don't see them.
Yeah.
In 4-player, it sometimes feels like you can't go a damn turn without seeing them. So
I think I've only seen that Shogoth once in Where Doom Awaits, and that was in a 3-player game that I played locally. Like, even in our Iron Man, I don't think it hit table. I don't remember it hitting table.
I don't think it ever did.
No, so.
Huh. I have to think on that. Go ahead, Ian.
Now my train of thought went off the rails. I guess just on the tip of positioning, like that matters not more, but it matters differently in 3 or 4-player. That I don't know. I find at least how I tend to build the 2-player decks. I've built a few that each are kind of well balanced enough they can spread out and do their own thing. Like I had a Jenny and Akachi run like that. But in general, I tend to the 2-player runs, they are sticking pretty close together. Whereas 3 and 4-player, you can explore that map and that positioning more. I think, like in our Iron Man of Carcosa, we basically had a buddy system of like 2 and 2, and we'd constantly split up in those pairs.
And that served us well.
I feel like we
specifically for that reason.
Like we actually like learned that lesson in Pallid Mask, because I think in Unspeakable Oath we were all kind of like, we're all just gonna go this every direction at once, and then Pallid Masks was when we were like, no, stay together.
I was like, Mark, don't go far, please. I'm Daisy.
You mean Leo?
Oh yeah, that's right. Pallid Mask. It was you and me. Leo, not Mark. Sorry, I was thinking my prep
just
campaign.
listed your two
Yeah, I know.
the characters you played.
Okay, so then I guess moving to higher player counts, I know we've covered a lot of this just talking about the differences, but any specific rules you look at for higher player counts? we've talked about you've got more room for silly builds that require a lot of like, hey, if you guys can keep me clear for 5 turns, I will wreck the end game. So Mystics. But beyond that, sort of like, okay, you can get into cute deck building. Anything else you guys consider more for 4-player, like card selection, strategies for scenarios, that sort of thing?
Cards like Teamwork and Stand Together actually start to look appealing in multiplayer, or in 4-player rather. So, I mean, 2 and 3 maybe not so much, but 4-player you actually do run into situations where those cards would be pretty useful. Casey brings up Stand Together is always good. I just think that you have more opportunity to use it in 4-player. Whereas there have been times in 2 players where I'm like, why did I spend the experience on Stand Together? So...
Well, in that if you've got it in your deck, you just have to think more about positioning. But just by the fact that you have to think about it, just kind of means it's a little bit more situational.
Right.
I think because you are just going to have more enemies on the board than like big area of effect spells like Storm of Spirits or Dynamite. It's not a spell, but it's area of effect damage. Like, they can hit big swarms. Like, those are the kinds of cards that really get increase in value in 3 and 4 player for sure. I guess anything that hits swaths of enemies at once, really.
Or anything like level 2 shortcut is a favorite of mine in 4 player, because if you can stick that on a hub location in 4 player, like, you can get so much work out of that one little card. And I think the other thing is just anything that kind of lends itself a little bit more towards specialization or accounting for randomness. Like Casey pointed out in the chat here, we definitely agreed with this strategy for Carcosa Iron Man. Like, the more people we can get packing cancels, your Ward of Protections, your Tests of Wills, like, the more you have of those, the better in higher multiplayer accounts, because you don't know where Beyond the Veil is going to show up. Or, what was the one we were really looking to cancel in Carcosa? Was it just Dim Carcosa? No, Dim Carcosa is the campaign. What's the big one that's like Corrosion on crack?
I can't remember the name of it.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Corrosion's pretty bad, but yeah, there is one that's like even worse. It's in the last couple scenarios, I think.
But to that point, like, we even had as a strategy, like, as a team, Safina and Daisy, our first buys after, I got higher ed, were upgrade your Wards of Protection, because being able to cancel any treachery that comes up, super good in 4 player.
Yeah. I think 4 player is where you can really explore the fun control builds, like really delving into Diana and Jim, and really focusing them down, like in the way that Scott always talks about with his, manscaping Jim and that sort of thing. I think that Scott's
never mentioned that deck before. You're crazy.
I think that you can definitely do it in 2 player and maybe even 3 player. But I think that you can't dedicate your deck to that so much. But in 4 player, I think there's definitely room to just be like, all I'm doing is handling the bag. And if you guys want to use the bag, you got to go through me. Like, I think there's a lot of space for that in 4 player.
And kind of on a similar tip as the cancels and controls are, like, on a smaller scale, even if you're not devoting a whole archetype to it, like the Manscaping Gym, but effects like, say, Premonition or Time Warp that are kind of letting you, what would you call those, like, probability mitigators?
Yeah, like setup cards. They're
right. Yeah, setup cards. That's a good way to think about it. Your double or nothings. That's kind of like a card that's setting up a big combo or enabling it. So all those kind of things are, again, you can use it in lower player counts, but in 3 or 4 player, you just have more space in your deck to devote to it, and because you have more players, you have more probability of drawing it. And, like, a good example is when I was doing the double or nothing Storm of Spirits and Dim Carcosa. Like, I think Sean had 2 Time Warps in hand, and I had 1 Time Warp in hand, and you guys committed a bunch of icons to it.
We premonitioned the one before that, and it's like...
Right.
Yeah.
It's like there was almost literally no way that would fail, just because we had so many, like, backups that can really enable those big plays to go off. And, conversely, 3 or 4 player, that's when you need those big combo pieces because you have more enemies and the bosses have
enemies
more health.
With 20 health.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and that's exactly it. Is the enemies, how they counter multiplayer is this enemy has a gob of health, so even if you've got a dedicated killer, you're not going to chew through this in a turn. So how you mitigate that is by the big combos with risk mitigation. And, if you're going to power game it, like, double or nothing with premonition is a great way to go.
So, and premonition is so good in 4-player, too, because you can, just pop that, say, at the beginning of a turn, and then you just, out of the 4 players, you just really know who can kind of get the best out of whatever that token is.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say Premonition is amazing in any player count.
Sure. I think that's a pretty strong limb.
Yeah.
Now, Nick, you're just standing on the trunk of the tree.
I'm putting my hand on the tree as I'm standing up firmly on the ground. I can't imagine playing purple without double Premonition. That card is amazing.
Yeah. And it's all just about knowing when to play it. It's a great card. And Casey points out another really good point here is in 4-player, I think even more than 3-player, but not as much more, but you think about turn sequence a lot more in higher player counts. Like,
yes.
Especially in those big setup turns that we're talking about where we're like, all right, well, what was the big one in Carcosa? Oh, yeah, it was Leo tossing the dynamite through the passageway. Like, because Leo didn't have, what's-his-head, Mr. Peabody, to turn it into a passageway. So you have to go like, all right, we have to move here. I have to go first, make this a passageway, get out of the way. And then Leo, like, you just have to really start thinking about, if you take a second to game it out, you can get a lot more out of a single turn, is basically it.
Well, and actually I did have Mr. Peabody because by that point I had double charisma.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So I took Peabody because I had the ally slots for it.
Okay, well, my shitty memory aside,
but
the point still stands.
But your point still... Yes, exactly.
All right, guys. Well, any final thoughts on differences between the player counts? I think it's a really fascinating topic. Despite the fact that we've talked about this for like a half hour, I feel like we've only dredged the surface on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. I think it's just a matter of like if you like one, it just comes through experience. Playing at those different counts is probably the best teacher if you're trying to figure out how to build differently. But I think it's if you just list the things that you need to do in a game of Arkham Horror and the card game, and then the difference in solo is like you're basically that list is covered by one deck, whereas it's a collaboration game in 4-player that you're figuring out how 4 decks are covering the same things. I guess that's the best summary I can come up with.
Excellent. So moving on to our second question for the night. This one comes from Morten, who is our director of Gug Relations and Beer Snobbery. So Morten writes, Dear Directors, let's see here. Do you think our beloved card game is suffering from Steward of Gondor syndrome? Now, this is a reference that comes from the fact that Morten is also a player of Lord of the Rings LCG, which Ian and I both played extensively, and Nick played a fair amount.
Drink.
Oh, drink. Oh, on it. Or, rephrased, do you think that some of the early cards are so strong that they end up limiting viable deck choices? When building decks for True Solo, I find it is hard to avoid certain power cards, such as Lucky, Ward of Protection, or powerful allies like Milan or Peter Sylvester, or attack cards like Shriveling or Machete, etc. In a deck with 30 cards, these staple cards can take up a lot of relative deck space, leaving little room, or slots, as it were, for newer, less efficient cards. So no, the obvious answer is not to play these cards and replace them with something else, but with the recent increase in difficulty with Forgotten Age, it just makes it hard. So I know we've already talked about this a little bit, but with specific focus on the game's kind of reliance, deck building reliance on staples, where do you think the game is at?
I think level 0 is where you see that the most, but I think as you upgrade, you see more ability to vary it up. But I mean, like, yeah, like it's brought up in chat now. Milan is the biggest defender of this.
Well, you mean
we've talked
DMC?
about that a lot. Yeah, and the Mississippi Manatee is another one that I go back to as well, because I still think that 6, maybe 5 resources is super worth a free action or an additional action every single turn. And then there's other stuff like, think about emergency quiche. Like, how often do you build a deck and not include quiche? Granted, that's more often now, but even still, I think most decks I probably use a minimum of 1, and then eventually upgrade out of it. So
here's the real question, and I actually really think that's an interesting point to bring up, because I on 100% agree with you on Milan. I'm not sure how I agree with you on quiche, because Milan is one where I'm like, this deck needs Milan, and I'm happy when he hits the board. I love it when I see him in my hand. And again, this is just like the very slim power gamery part of me. But when I include quiche as a rule, just because burst economy is few and far between in the game right now. When I draw a quiche, I'm not excited about it.
No, it's not a fun card to play. It's not flashy, but it does something that the game needs. Like you said, it gives you that burst economy that you do need at times. And I think it's, other than Contraband or straight up upgrading quiche, it's the only one that really does that all in one go. I mean, I suppose you could alchemical transmutation if you're, like bad at the game, but quiche is really the only option for getting multiple resources in one go consistently and without tests and without building around it at level 0. So
I think kind of the way I approach this question is that there's definitely staples in the game, but not every staple is problematic in my opinion. Like, if I think about quiche, it's just kind of this vanilla card that has to exist for decks, but it doesn't bother me like something like Steward of Gondor and Lord of the Rings, because it's just a one-time event. It's not dominating your deck and your player.
It's not
in
really
the same
crowding
way.
much out.
Yeah, I feel like Milan would be more of a problem just because he's an ally. He's taking up an ally slot, which is kind of one of the slots that gives the most character to decks, I feel like, is like a big decision of any deck is what ally do I take. So if that slot is monopolized by a certain card, then that's a bigger effect or a bigger problem than something like quiche or like, say, an unexpected courage. It's not really defining the deck, but something like Milan kind of defines the deck, and so if it's monopolized by a certain card, then it's a little bit more of a problem, I think.
Well, in Milan, like, especially in solo play, you then start to look at other Seeker allies, like specifically Ellie and Charles, and you go,
Attorney Urkel,
like,
for those who don't know his proper name.
And
like
you go,
me.
why would I ever take them in place of Milan in a solo game? Now, unless you're getting super hard into a specific type. Now, Charles, I don't think you would ever pick him in a solo game. I don't think you would.
I don't think so.
But Ellie, I have with my solo Ursula, because I went heavy relic build, and I did the Ornate Bow, and I did Chthonian Stone, and I had Tooth of Edsley. So that was what I was building the deck around. But short of a laser-focused strategy like that, why would you ever not choose Milan? And that's just, like, he really does dominate that for Seekers.
Yeah, I think the times I haven't taken him, I think one of the only alternatives that I found viable are, like, the kind of chump army of art students and lab assistants and all those. Because you're doing those are for builds where you're doing something different. You're not really caring so much about the resources. You're in it more for the soaks and the Tesla stuff. I wouldn't say those are better than Milan for sure. They're a viable alternative, but I think Milan is definitely the closest to that problem. And I'm not even convinced he is problematic, but I think he's the closest. Because even some of the other ones, like Peter in Survivor, I don't take Peter in every Survivor deck for sure. Like, there's some decks I prefer
Right.
Madame LeBranche. There's some in Windy where I'm taking rogue allies. And same with the Manatee. There's rogue decks that I use other allies. So, yeah.
You know what's
probably
really
Milan
interesting
is the
about this
closest.
discussion? I agree that Milan is the closest thing we have to a problem card in this regard. And trying to parse out why, I look at another card that there was just so much noise about being a problem card, and that would be Key of Ease. But the thing is I don't hear much noise about that anymore. It's like people have just kind of been like, I'm not going to include it anymore.
Right.
So my question is, why do you guys think that we haven't gotten there with Milan? Because he is so much older.
I think it's because he doesn't like the card itself. When you physically look at the text on the card, Milan doesn't seem as flashy or like Key of Ease is literally +1 to every skill, and then I know physically look. I know, Casey, that was a slip of the tongue, but when you physically place your eyeballs on the card, but Milan's just like +1 int, great. And then every time you succeed at investigate, gain a resource. Awesome. So like when you read the card, it sounds... I don't think he seemed as powerful just from reading it, you know what I mean, as like Key of Ease did. Anything that's like +1 to every skill just hits you so much quicker when you're reading that card. And so I think Milan kind of slid under the...
Sorry, I laughed because Mikey says in the chat here, some of you have never been as bad at this game as me, and it really shows.
I honestly forgot Key of East was even a card because I used it in Solo Ursula, and that was it. So I just think Milan was one of those ones that kind of just sneaked up on everybody, and at least I didn't value him nearly as highly as I do now. Earlier in the game when there were fewer allies. So I guess I don't know for sure.
I think the difference is Key of Ease is an end. Milan is a means. Like, he is fine for the intellect boost, and that's great. But Key of Ease, you get it on the table, it plays fine, especially if you can protect it with something that soaks horror. Aside from it taking horror, like, you can just keep that on the board forever and be amazing. Milan, it just becomes so intoxicating. Like, hey, I can actually pay for all of the cards I have in my hand now. Whereas,
hey, I don't need Unearth the Ancients.
No one needs Unearth the Ancients.
Scott does.
He'll find his deck for it eventually. But my point being that Milan is just... It's such a crutch to lean on, and you get so comfortable with it, and all you have to do is take up that ally slot. And I think just Seeker has a weakness of ally slots. Like, Art Student and Lab Assistant are good in the decks that kind of want that sort of thing, but those decks aren't doing the sort of thing, generally, that Milan would reward.
They're great in non-Seekers, I think.
Right. So... It's just really interesting because I agree fully that you just need a good reason not to run Milan, and that to me is it's edging into that point of a card becoming too prevalent, too auto-include, dare I say too powerful.
But one thing I will say, though, is I think the difference between Milan and something like Steward of Gondor that makes me not feel bitter feelings towards Milan is that Steward of Gondor is so dominant. Okay, so for people who haven't played Lord of the Rings, it's basically a card that you exhaust to get 2 extra resources per turn. Like, that's it. And it pays for itself on the first turn.
In a game where normally you max out at 3 resources per turn.
Yeah, so it's almost doubling your resource generation just by playing a card. So literally asks nothing of you. And so it's impossible to design a card that is as powerful as Steward of Gondor. You just can't. And so there've been lots of other resource generation cards, and you can build decks without it. But you just can't. Whereas Milan is one of the most powerful cards in the game, no doubt. Like, I'm not taking anything away from it. But I do think it's possible to design a Seeker ally and several Seeker allies that make you want to play it instead of Milan without being, like, batshit broken. You know? Like, totally. I think it's possible, which makes me feel good about, like, where the game is at. That Milan is right now dominating that space, but I think there's enough design space open that you could provide competitors to Milan.
You mean literally any other resource acceleration?
Sure.
Here's like quiche. Here's a good way to measure if original powerful cards are dominating the game. Early on in our podcast, Scott said that there is a holy trinity of core set cards that you always include 2 of each.
Oh, I'm so sad that he's not here for you to say this to his face.
I know, right? But I'm going to. I know he would.
afterward.
I know he would. He would turn this around anyway because I don't think he agrees with this anymore. But he said that you always do 2 of quiche, 2 of flashlight, and 2 of unexpected courage. And I can say that right now, with every bit of confidence, the vast majority of my decks do not include 2 of all of those. Most of them don't even include flashlight at all. So these cards that we felt like were staples back in Dunwich, or maybe even early Carcosa, definitely do not feel like staples anymore because we've had enough variety inject itself into the different classes and all that now everybody kind of has an answer for everything in their own way, which is really cool.
And yes, I would piggyback off that and say that I feel like Milan is not broken. He's really super powerful, possibly top 3 cards in the game in a variety of decks. But I feel like the only reason he sits atop that throne is because his space is so unchallenged at this point. You know what is sitting there challenging Milan? Attorney Urkel and Unearth the Ancients. That's not... I mean, like... It's not very stiff competition.
Both require very specific builds.
You give Seeker a level 0 some other way to get resources. People start looking at Milan a little less hard because then Attorney Urkel, if you've got some other way to get resources and then reduce cost of your items, like that seems more attractive. It's just the fact that there is literally, well, not literally. It really depends on your investigator. People can dip into other factions. There's physically. There are just no other options. Nothing's infringing on his space. Nothing is challenging his territory in any meaningful way.
Yeah.
And as soon as we get to a point where there are things that are actually like, hey, this is good enough that I could reasonably rely on it for resource acceleration. It's never going to be as good as Milan. Nothing ever should be. But I can make a workable deck out of it, and then instead I can run this ally? Like, I would jump all over that. I'm so excited for the age where I can be like, hey, Milan, not in this deck, pal.
Yeah, even going up in experience, like, what is the competition for allies in Seeker? Like, because you compare that to Rogue, and you have strong competition with Lola coming in when you get to higher levels, or Cat Burglar. Like, there's a few very strong rogue allies. Same in Survivor with Yaddle and who am I forgetting? Even Aquina is good in certain decks. So there's just not that competition for Seeker.
Right.
Some of the other cards he mentioned, because we've been very Milan focused, but like Machete and Shriveling, I don't know. I don't feel like those bother me. I feel like each class kind of needs a base level weapon. Like you think about an RPG you're playing, your class starts with some kind of base level weapon, and like I feel like that's what those cards are. But
I feel like Machete gets a lot of hype because the community is very solo bent, and in solo, Machete is indeed very high value proposition.
I use Machete in solo or in off-Guardian decks, but other than that, even in off-Guardian decks, I don't always include it, so...
Like, because the test for me is, like, it would be a problem if I was like, okay, I have Machete, like, I don't need any other weapon. Or I have Shriveling, I don't need any other spells in my life. But I'm always thinking about...
But then Shards of the Void came out.
Yeah, it's like, what other spells am I adding? Ooh, Shards of the Void is good, even Song of the Dead, or... What higher level weapons am I gonna upgrade to? It's like I think it's fine to have those base level weapons and spells as long as you still feel compelled to reach out and get other stuff. Again,
the level 0, I think level 0 decks is where we see this the most.
Mm-hmm.
But then as you gain experience and upgrade, that's when you're able to branch out, which I think is a good place to be. I'm totally fine with a lot of level 0 decks looking vaguely similar and then becoming more and more individual as they gain experience, because that's straight up how RPGs work, and guess what Arkham is based off of? So,
well, and I agree that, you know, looking at the other cards that Morten listed, which I feel like are a pretty good list of the cards that are reaching that space. The reason that we ruminated so long on Milan is I feel like he's the closest to it, to kind of that game warping space. I think the only time it really becomes a problem is when you as a player feel limited in your deck building choices, where you feel like, if I don't include this card, I am making an active decision to make my deck worse.
Yes.
And, you know, I love Water Protection. I can make a deck without Water Protection, and I don't feel like it's going to be significantly worse. Yeah, it's not going to be able to pivot on those harder treacheries as well. But, you know, there are decks that have no access to any cancels, and they can play the game just fine. So, but just, again, right now, because there's no challenge to that space, when you play Milan, it's like, rather when you don't play Milan, you're like, I am actively making my deck less good because what I'm including, maybe Relic Ursula, Ellie Horowitz aside, I am making my deck less good. So kind of rounding it back, any other cards you guys would add to Morten's list of cards that are like edging on staples / auto includes?
Are we talking just core set, or are we talking all?
Oh, in general. I don't think it really matters when a card releases. If it feels like you have to put it in every deck, it could potentially be a problem.
Yeah, I think Casey's right. He brought up in chat Streetwise and Higher Ed. Those are two that I would...
Those definitely stand far above Scrapper and Keen Eye.
Yeah. Those two are pretty much going into every Rogue and Seeker deck I build at some point.
Dan says Charisma. If we had been in Dunwich, I would have agreed with you, but for some reason, after we left Dunwich, I found myself not including it as often. Like, I'd run, depending on the deck, 2 to 4 or 5 allies and still feel pretty okay about it. And Casey brings up a good point that Charisma is less warping because it's neutral, and it's not really it's not really competing for anything. Like, you just, except for experience, you spend the experience and you get the slots. It doesn't inhibit your ability to build decks. In fact, I would just say it enhances it, because then you have more options for allies.
The only thing that really comes to mind offhand is stick to the plan, but because that's such an experience sink, I can totally see, you know, avoiding that, or not avoiding it, but actively not going for it. But I think stick to the plan has done so much for Guardian's setup that it, you know, to me, that's one thing that I'm always like, okay, if I were to take it, what would I put under it? Do I have two things that I'm always going to be putting there? Is it, you know, like, that really kind of redefined Guardian's early game. But I don't think it's approaching the Milan tier of auto-includes. So.
Yeah, I think the ones that would verge most on that problematic end would be, like, the Streetwise and Higher Ed, just because they are so... Like, I've gotten in places with certain, like, Seeker Higher Ed decks where it's like, you're just kind of picking cards to put in your deck, but you don't really care, because you can boost your intellect and will high enough that you're going to pass most stuff, and it almost doesn't matter what the cards in your hand are. So, and Streetwise, similarly, maybe not as much to the extent, but, like, I'm heavily dependent on Streetwise as a rogue, and I can't even imagine what it would be without it. That... I don't know. I feel like I'm split. I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing. Like, maybe that's just necessary for a class. But on the other hand, maybe that does limit cards that I might look at if they didn't exist.
Well, and just kind of rounding back to the point I made, I think that just reinforces it. There's noise made about Higher Ed, for sure, especially when Rex was involved. And Streetwise is really good. But I feel like the reason people complain about it a little bit and then the discussion kind of goes away is that aside from the opportunity cost of the experience, it's not limiting your deck building in any meaningful way. Like, just you don't buy it and you move on with your life and you can continue. But yeah, I would say in general the game is in a really good place for staples. Auto includes deck variety, and that's really what this is about, right? Like the variety of decks that can reliably beat scenarios. The game's in a really good place. I feel like when we get a difficulty spike like we had in TFA, it exacerbates any situations that exist, because then in order to, again, reliably succeed, you feel even more like you have to build into the power cards. But the game's in a great place. It's got, like Ian said, so much room to expand. Like, as soon as things start impinging on Staples territory, I think we're going to stop worrying about it so much. So yeah.
Agreed.
So thank you, Morten, for that question. That's one that I've been looking to talk about for a while, so it's good to put into that one. Guys, let's finish this trio of listener questions off with kind of a lighter one. Which investigators do you think would benefit from new signature cards via a novella or whatever other medium that FFG would like to give us signature cards, like an entire pack of signature replacements for investigators that FFG should please give us, please? Everyone else would buy that,
Sean,
right?
do you want
not
to...
just me?
Oh, totally.
Okay.
I was going to say, Sean, do you want to lead us with the most obvious?
I would love to lead with one Agnes Baker, who I think is still a great investigator, is not terribly hindered by this, but I feel like she suffers the most from the bad ratio of how bad your signature weakness is to how good your signature asset or your signature good card is. It was funny, we were actually just talking in the Discord the other day, a couple of us, about like, what if you tried to make the heirloom of Hyperborea work? I have the deck block for a Sorceress Agnes deck built for standalone, just to be like, okay, how many spells can I fit in this thing to just draw through my deck as quickly as possible if I assume that I'm ever going to want to play the heirloom? And I built all the cards up in the deck, kind of got the deck there, and then as soon as I went to start making cuts, I was like, this isn't fun anymore. And so the heirloom itself is just it's so interesting, because so many of the investigator signature cards are just so intrinsically tied to their ability, their shtick, their card access. Nothing else about Agnes, aside from her high willpower and the fact that she's Mystic, says you need to play spells.
Right.
And 3 cost is a huge thing. And then taking up the accessory slot is also, it's depending on your investigator, it's not huge, but it's a thing that you need to consider, because Agnes does have access to other accessories that are actually something you might want to consider. Even back to the core set, you might want to look at Holy Rosary for Agnes. As soon as you get that down, heirloom becomes either a guts or an overpower without the draw.
So what would you propose that she has in place of those?
My dream replacement signature for Agnes is just like, even if
Can't
we're...
say forbidden knowledge.
No, well, we already have that. I don't have to dream. I'm living it, baby. If I'm going to dream, and let's just say I'm going to redesign the heirloom, just keeping it super grounded. The heirloom, instead of being based on spells, would be just an asset, 2 or 3 cost. It has 3 sanity, and then on some trigger, when you activate an action ability on a spell or succeed at a willpower test on a treachery, whatever you decide it would be, you can move horror from Agnes to the heirloom. And that, to me, would feed way more into what Agnes is already doing than draw a card when you play a spell.
Yeah, I like that. I definitely agree she should have her own signatures. I can think of a more wild signature alternative, which would be fun if you're able to enter, tap into her sorceress past life, and somehow there's an asset that turns her into Sorceress God mode. But then
I want that now. That's my dream now.
But then once it wears off, somehow you're like tapped from all the energy you channeled. So you'd have to like pick the right moment to unleash the sorceress. That would be fun.
Interesting. Oh yeah, and Casey points out that her 3rd edition ability played with blood magic, where in Arkham Horror 3rd edition to cast spells you often spend sanity, but Agnes can instead spend health, and when she does, she gets a bonus to her spell casting ability and do extra damage, or I can't remember exactly how it works. It's been a while since I've played 3rd ed with Agnes, but something like that could be pretty cool. But yeah.
Yeah.
And then for her signature weakness, I don't know, but literally anything would be better than an Ancient Evils that you have to pay for.
It's a double shift. She has to work a double shift at the diner. Those are the worst.
So who else do you think suffers from the I have a terrible signature good card and a really powerful signature bad card? Or just for whatever other reason you'd want a different signature.
Sticking in the core set, I would say Skids. Not that either his signature or weakness are like horrible. They're just kind of bland. Like, I would like to see him get something more exciting on both ends of that.
I mean, I think that his weakness is well designed, and I think it fits his character pretty well. I don't really have any qualms about that. It is kind of boring, but like you say.
Yeah.
But I think that his signature card is... I think that's second to being the most offensive after the heirloom. Because when do you play that? Never.
It's fine. I've gotten use out of it here and there, but it's... Like, compared to...
I said never, Ian.
Compared to some of the signature assets that other investigators get, like, it doesn't really combo necessarily with his ability. I mean, other than if you're thinking about you can get an extra action and do a bunch of stuff while enemies aren't attacking you. But it would just be nice to get something that really is, like, synergizing with his ability.
Yeah.
I know I already went, but can I posit another one?
Sure.
Oh, hang on, because I got 2 in mind.
Go on.
Is it another core set investigator?
It was.
Is it Daisy?
It is. Go.
Yeah, I knew it. Yeah, Daisy. And again, this is an interesting place because I love the design of the Necronomicon in Daisy. Mm-hmm. Like, I really like that. I think that's really cool and interesting, and it brings questions like, do you do it right away? When it hits table is a really interesting play. But that tote
Or do you just let it ride?
Or do you just let it hang out and not worry about it? But that tote bag is I mean... You want to talk about, like, a bookmark card. Like, that's all it's good for, is just holding your spot in the campaign log. I would love to see something... I don't know, like, as far as accessing tomes. I mean, she already has the research librarian for that, so you don't really need to do that.
It'd be cool to have access to something like that in not the ally slot, though.
That's true. That's very true. Something like a Dewey Decimal System... signature card that lets you pull one tome. Yeah, I think that'd be great. I know Sean probably has more he wants to say about Daisy, but I'm going to jump. He just stepped away real quick, so I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about one that I thought of. Lola. Now, I like improvisation a lot, and I am on record, and I still believe that Crisis of Identity is not as crippling as Sean and Scott seem to think so. But what I think as good as I think improvisation is, I think what Lola could really benefit from is drop that down from 2 and 2 on her signatures, and instead give her 1 and 1 like everybody else, and make that one signature card an attachment that you slap onto any asset, and it turns that asset neutral and takes its class away. You could limit it to just items, you could limit it to just, talents or something like that, but I think that would help her so much when it comes to building a deck for her and unlocking some extra jankery with her that you just can't quite get to, because that role segregation. It needs to be there, but at the same time, it's also, I think it's just a little too harsh. So I think having one card in your deck that lets you bypass that could be super useful. And then I don't know what her new weakness would be, but probably something to counter that.
Yeah, I think the rough part is because that weakness is so key to Lola, like to keep players on their toes. I think it would have to be fairly similar in design,
right?
But just doing it a little differently, I guess.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was. I mean, other than the three that I had in my head have all been said: Skids, Daisy, and Lola. Other than that, I'm looking at the list of investigators. I'm trying to, like, the rest of them are all fairly solid.
I feel like the core set suffered a little bit from, like, these investigators are establishing the norm for their classes. Their signatures kind of reflect that a little bit. And since then, they've tightened it up to be like, hey, this is part of the identity of this investigator. Now, that said, the novella ones that we got from Carolyn can be pretty terrible, but that said, we now have legit Carolyn now.
Yes.
I can't remember if I've said this on the podcast or not, but I feel like there's actually a little bit of a delineation. If you're crazy enough to do it, the replacement signatures for Carolyn lend themselves better to solo play, and the normal signatures lend themselves better to multiplayer. I've yet to test that theory, but just eyeballing them and playing a lot of multiplayer, that's kind of where I've pegged them.
Yeah, I agree that
one's
the
her
design...
solo set and one's her multiplayer set.
Yeah, I do think the design has improved over time, that it's mostly the core investigators that would need help. I think one interesting one would be Rex. Not that he needs help in terms of power, because he surely doesn't. But I think that could be an opportunity, because Rex is actually an interesting character. I remember reading one of the old Arkham novels, and he intrigued me, which is why I was kind of sad that I don't play Rex anymore, because he's overpowered. So I think there's an opportunity there to give him a signature that encourages players to do something different than just spam higher ed. I don't know what that would look like, but I think there's something there that could be done.
What if instead of a signature card, they gave him another weakness that just emptied his hand? So he has two
blanks
weaknesses
his text
and no
box.
signature.
Yeah, nothing else
just
is
a
really
thought.
springing to mind.
Yeah, I don't know.
I still have not played a single game with Norman. How are his SIGs?
They're pretty terrible. But that's the thing, is like
I know his
he's
weakness
yet to
is the
come out
Hound.
with his normal one. The Hound is okay. I think it really saves itself by the fact that it's 2 fight, 2 health. Like, mind over matter, I've got a plan. If you've got a single shriveling, like, he can take care of it pretty quickly. It's not extremely threatening. But his signature asset, I don't recall that I've ever actually played that down and used it.
I'll look that up real quick.
That's the one where it's a 2-cost asset, you play it down. As an action, you can look at the top card of the encounter deck. And then as a free action, you can discard both the top card of the encounter deck and the top card of your deck. So the idea being, you're always seeing the top card of your deck. You can be like, that's a good trade to lose this card for that card of the encounter deck. But I feel like in order for that to actually be playable, you got to flip the two. Like, the free action has to become the action. But
that's that.
Anyway, I'm never excited when I see Split the Angle. I like the art, and I read the Norman story, so it's kind of a cool tie-in. But
sure,
yeah,
I'm very excited to see what his original signature cards are.
What if his original one lets you? I don't know. Lets you either put a spell from hand on top of your deck, or pull one from discard pile and put it on top of your deck.
I'd be super okay with that.
Even just taking from hand, like if it was a free action, put Storm of Spirits on top of your deck. Now it only costs 2.
Yeah, no. Okay. So we always make the comparison because Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings LCG, the hero, has a very similar ability, and one of his signature cards is Wizard Pipe. It's a little cheap asset that lets you it's an attachment. It lets you just swap a card in your hand for the top card of your deck. And it's amazing with Gandalf, and I feel like it would be worth it to have that as a little free action, like a little 1-cost asset, free action, swap a card with your hand to the top card of your deck, boom. Norman would play the shit out of that.
Should we take bets now to see if that's what his actual signature is? Because I would feel like that seems almost like the go-to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then Split the Ankle was like, we need something else.
I wouldn't take high odds on that. I think Matt would want to do something different, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did, a Wizard Pipe for Norman, because it just works. Like, that makes so much sense.
And Casey in chat says that it's too synergistic, but at the same time, it's 1 card in your deck of 30. So I think if ever there's room to have, quote-unquote, too synergistic, it's with the signature. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Although, I guess, how many other investigators have a signature that yeah, Agnes says hello. Yeah, well, we've already talked about Agnes. She's in the dumpster when it comes to signatures. She showed up last at the signature soup kitchen.
Oh, God. I want to disagree, but you're super not wrong. I would say, as far as like investigators, where when you windmill slam their signature down, it's a different game. Is that what you were asking? Kind of in the opposite direction. Akachi?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Akachi. Oh my God, I love Akachi.
Spirit
like having played her now,
amazing card.
Spirit Speaker's amazing. So good. Like occasionally bouncing spells back, but turning them into cash is so nice. I still haven't had the chance to play with Roland's new sig. I know that his 38 is fine, but I like the look of his new sig, but I haven't actually gotten it to the table yet.
Like, if you can fill your deck out where you don't need the extra weapon, like, you can drop Roland's originals completely, because cover up in a campaign can be a backbreaker at the wrong time.
Yes.
Josh says Marie. I have yet to actually play Marie, so I can't weigh in here. But Marie seems like she's in an interesting place. Her signature event seems really good.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Seems really, really good. Stopping the agenda from advancing, like, is there any other effect in the game that does that?
No.
And the Baron, he seems kind of rough.
Yeah.
He is, yeah.
So, I'm kind of okay with the fact that both of them swing in really powerful directions.
Yeah, the Baron is like To Fight the Black Wind almost, but Mystifying Song is the proper balance to that, whereas Foolishness was like not.
Quite.
Foolishness is a fucking project. Let's go with that. You're like buying a fixer-upper. For 4 cost in an ally slot. I mean, not that it's hard for Carolyn to heal horror, but for God's sake, come on now.
Right.
Anyway. Okay. Well, let's wrap it on that thought. Seems as good a place as any to end it. So we've got. I want Patrick, who's a dear friend of ours, to not worry that we've gotten his voicemail. We're actually waiting for Scott to be on the episode to address it. So we're going to skip over that voicemail. We'll get to it next time. Guys, I think we're into tentacle time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Holy shit. Nick, what you up to? What RPG are you playing right now?
I was going to say, everyone probably expects me to say Miris, but I'm actually not going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons this week. I got one of my Kickstarter board games last week. It shipped. And it is the board game Dinogenics. So I'm going to gush about my other passion, other than RPGs, and that is dinosaurs. Dinogenics is a 1 to 5 player dinosaur park management board game. And it does that really, really well. The components are absolutely beautiful. I'm going to share a picture in our chat here real quick, but they're all wooden meeples of dinosaurs and visitors. They're color-coded, so in this picture they're all green, but they're actually all different colors, which is cool, different shades of green for the herbivores and brown for the carnivores. I've played two-player games, and I've played 4 solo games. And now, the fact that it calls it a solo game, that's kind of... It doesn't really fit, because it's not really solo games, they're more like solo challenges. You have 10 different scenarios, quote unquote, and it's like, achieve these additional objectives by the end of a normal game playing by yourself, and then there's different rules to go with it. But it's a worker placement game that's also about building a dinosaur park, and it's super fun.
Worker placement seems like a very crucial element to building a dinosaur park, like even in real life.
Right, yeah. And I just realized that image I shared isn't exactly representative of what the final game looks like. But anyway, the only downsides that I can see to it right now...
What's the one with its tail up? Is that an ankylosaurus?
There's an ankylosaur, yeah, in the kind of the middle row.
Okay.
And then the one below that with its tail up is a mutant.
A mutant? I would have taken it for a Deinonychus.
No, there's raptors in here.
Deinonychus, come on now. Let's.
The card calls it a raptor. Uniraptor is the same. Is about that size.
Okay, I'll accept it.
Anyway, the art is beautiful. I love the art for just the game box. Let me see if I can find a good image of that.
All right, Casey asking the real questions in chat here. Is there a point in the game where the dinosaurs break loose?
Yes.
Yes.
That's one of the constant struggles, is to make sure that all your dinosaurs are in proper habitats, because at the end of each round it checks for rampage. And if your carnivores are not fed, or if any of your dinosaurs are not in a proper habitat, then they will rampage, and you roll dice to see how many buildings get destroyed, how many people get killed, and when people die you gain scandal tokens, and that severely reduces your victory points. The only downside I've noticed so far is that it can get there's a couple elements to the game that make it kind of swingy. There's a specific building that you can purchase, and all the buildings come up randomly, so you're not even guaranteed to see it. But when it does, it's called like the archives or something, and it accounted for a 42-point swing in my wife and I's game one time. And I bought it last round because that's when it came up, and suddenly I went from being like 5 points behind her to being untouchable, like super far ahead of her, and that didn't really feel well. Didn't feel great. So there's a couple of elements to it that they kind of create NPEs, negative player experiences, but overall it's beautiful. It is fun. It has a solo ability to it, like solo playable, which I didn't expect. And I will be bringing this to our game weekend, because I am really interested to see how 5-player works. Like how it's more cutthroat than Lords of Waterdeep.
Yeah.
You end up stealing actions and playing cards against each other more so than Lords of Waterdeep, which is relatively low on the competitive scale.
Can I deactivate defense on your Predator's paddock?
I haven't seen a manipulation card that does something like that, but I would not be surprised if it existed.
I mean, how can you tiptoe so close to Jurassic Park without including something like that?
Right, exactly. And Casey asked if you can steal other people's dinosaurs. You can't steal them, but you can go, like, there was one game where my wife, the Brontosaurus is the hardest one to make because it costs the most DNA and it gives you the most points. She had a Brontosaurus. That is a valid name now as of 2015. Brontosaurus is a valid dinosaur species.
What, really? Did they reappropriate
Yeah,
it?
I know, right?
Like, I'm sorry for going dinosaur nerd on everyone here, but...
I've had to retrain myself to stop correcting people, and as a result, now I've been saying Brontosaurus more to get myself used to that. Huh. Yeah. But anyway, you spend matching. You have DNA cards in your hand, and if you have matching sets, you create dinosaurs. And the Brontosaurus requires 4. So anyway, she had one. I played a card that let me copy her Brontosaurus and put it in my park. So that was really cool, and that was a nice point swing to answer Casey's question. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm excited to play more of it with higher player counts.
I'll be excited to try it. Ian, what you been up to? What's grabbing your time?
Not too exciting this week, because I feel like I've just been doing the same things that I have been doing the weeks before, which is playing Arkham, playing Red Dead Redemption 2, and
I'm living that life too, baby.
watching True Detective.
Yes.
So I guess what I'll talk about is True Detective Season 3. Not spoiling anything, but it's made me think of a cool custom scenario idea because it's not a spoiler to say this because it's like in this season descriptions, but it basically takes place over in 3 different time periods, like in 1980, 1990, and the present. All dealing with the same case but at different time periods, and it shifts between, and sometimes you can only kind of get it just by the haircuts of people and the clothes they're wearing and that kind of thing. But I think it would be really cool to have a campaign in Arkham or a scenario that plays with similar things where like that would even be a cool opportunity to like step outside the 1920s a little bit. Like maybe you have one in the 1910s, part of the campaign is in the regular 1920s, and then maybe you flash forward to the 40s or something, and then your investigators are still like investigating the same case but in these different time periods. I think that would be really cool to do something like that.
Do you have any thought as to how that would mechanically work? It sounds cool.
I mean, the easiest way would be within a campaign, so that in one scenario you're like, say you're in the 1910 time period, and then stuff that you do there will affect what you do in the 1920s, say. So if you discovered this book in 1910, then it'll be there in 1920, but if not, or if you defeated this enemy, it won't be there, but if you did, then it'll be... if you didn't defeat it, then it'll be in some other form. Just simple things like that. But I think it would also be cool to maybe mechanically deal with things having to do with memory and like misremembering parts of what you did in the past. I guess that's vague. I didn't give a good mechanical manifestation of that, but exploring that would be interesting, I think. Someone asked in the chat, does it match the quality of Season 1? Is it a return to the quality of Season 1? I can't answer that because the season's not over yet. I think I can only fully answer that when the season is over. But just on the basis of what I've seen so far, the first 3 episodes, I would say yes. Like, it's fully engrossed like I was in Season 1. It might be hard to fully match it just because of those characters in Season 1, and it was new, and
so
like
good.
the atmosphere. But it's also like comparing, I don't know, the pinnacle of... Maybe I'm going too far with it, hyperbole, but the pinnacle of any art form. Like, if you compare something else to that and say it doesn't quite match it, that doesn't mean that other thing is not great. It just means that
I still think that
if you know of a better true crime drama than Season 1 of True Detective, I would love to know of it.
Yeah, because the thing is, that's not even necessarily my wheelhouse of show, but it's just so good that it like transcends the genre, and it does something different than like just some police procedural too. I think that's like the True Detective brand.
Well, and that's the thing is in my opinion, classic Law and Order is amazing, and The Wire was really good. But True Detective takes all of the high points of those series, it adds a new layer to it, and it condenses it down to one season. Like, that's what was so good. Like, that season is perfect.
Like, every episode is just banging.
Yeah, whereas, like, Law and Order had some good ones and some bad ones, and The Wire had some that were obviously better than others, like, that sort of thing. Like, there were highs and lows across multiple seasons, but True Detective was literally like, if you want a season of perfect television, it's True Detective Season 1. So hearing that Season 3 is, at least so far, giving you the same feeling, that's incredibly promising to me.
Yeah, and I think I haven't seen Season 2. I should really watch it despite everyone saying it sucks, just so I can intelligently compare it. But part of what I've heard of the problem of Season 2 was that it just like threw too many cast members and wasn't as focused. Whereas I feel like Season 3 really returns to the formula of Season 1, not in a bad way, but this formula of like, you know, a guy and his partner, and they're really focusing in on those characters and their families, and really just zoning in on that instead of spreading its attention over like all kinds of people and spreading it out too much. But I like that it's also not just like copying those characters. Like, let's have another Rust, like the main characters in these are very different while still hitting some of the same themes, and the relationship of the main character to his family is very different. So yeah, definitely recommend it.
I went so long being, and just kind of tangenting off that, like, I went so long being so ambivalent about McConaughey, but God, Russ sold me on McConaughey.
He was so amazing.
Wow, it took you that long, huh?
Yeah.
Well, what did he have before that? Like, I recently...
I guess I
want to say recently,
probably watched...
it's been like a year and a half I saw Interstellar, and that was pretty good, though not necessarily bending on McConaughey's performance. Like,
no.
my biggest thing, like, my two memorable performances from McConaughey were How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
Oh, gross.
And Rain of Fire. So, like, these really weird extremes. And yeah, so anyway, I was just always kind of like, he's got some interesting things going on, but, whatever. Dude, he killed Russ so hard. That character's so good.
Yes.
Yeah, and in season 3, the main actor is Mahershala Ali, who played Cottonmouth in Luke Cage, which I had
he's so good.
Yeah, I had not really seen much of him. I know he's in the movie Moonlight, which I haven't seen, which got good reviews. But in Luke Cage, every scene he was in, I was just like transfixed. Like, this dude is so good. So when he was announced as the main actor in this season, and that's what initially made me excited. And then his partner is played by, oh god, I'm forgetting his name. Hopefully chat will help me out. He played the role I know him most for, Steven Dorff, I think it is. The role I know him most for is playing the bad guy in Blade, the main bad vampire in Blade. I haven't seen him in anything for a while, but he's really good in his role as well, and he looks much different than he did in the past. So I think it's like a brand new actor, but. Yeah, they're both doing a good job, and Steven Dorff's character is named Roland, so I'm sure you'll enjoy that, Nick.
Wow.
All right, well,
I'm glad that we're getting one good version of Roland on screen.
Aw, Idris Elba did an amazing job with what he was handed.
I still haven't seen that movie. We have an episode of Mythos Busters literally called Towergasm. And I still haven't seen that movie.
Well, okay, so here's another thing. That's another movie that McConaughey's in, and I wanted to see more McConaughey as the Man in Black, or as the Walking Man, or, whatever weird conglomeration they made him of the actual characters. Anyway, yeah, I mean, there are some cool parts. It gets some of the visuals right, but for the most part, it just rounds off all of the weird, cool edges of the actual Dark Tower that made it distinct and cool and makes it generic, and that's kind of the biggest sin of it.
And distills it down to a single movie.
Well, and I would have been fine with that if it had taken some fucking chances, but it was so bland. It was so bland.
Sure.
Anyway. So normally this time, for my part, I would, I've been doing the Arkham and Red Dead life, as I mentioned, for sure. That's been like 90% of my gaming time. Last weekend, I also participated in the VIP Anthem demo, which the demo and the infrastructure itself was just a mess. If you go read anything on it, it's highly accurate. In case you ask how long I got to load for. Yeah, probably about 5-10 minutes before I actually got into a session every time I started playing the game, which doesn't sound like much, but when you're sitting there waiting to load, that's a really fucking long time.
2 minutes is a lot.
But what kept me playing is what was tough about it. The first time I started playing, I got in like right away, and the game itself I have found to be pretty fun. The demo itself is pretty limited. I have no idea how the story elements and the actual level progression, the treadmill itself is going to work. But once you get in, flying around in Anthem is fun. The class system looks like it's going to be pretty cool. I tried Destiny out, Nick. I know you tried that out with me on my insistence, and I'm really sorry. But I
don't blame you.
Yeah, well, you have every right to. But the thing is it seems to be, as long as they don't get too oddly aggressive with the microtransaction system, and it's EA, so I'm not holding my breath, but it seems to be everything I wanted out of Destiny, but with kind of like this real Mass Effect feel. Like the combat feels close to Andromeda, which I felt was like some of the tightest combat in the Mass Effect series. But with a little bit more open world verticality, a lot more movement involved. But anyway, excited about that game. If you're on PSN, hit me up. I'm NPC421 because, you know, everyone's an NPC to everyone else. And also the PlayStation Network doesn't let you change your username from things you thought were cool when you were 20.
So I heard on another podcast, they were talking about Anthem, and they said something that I chuckled at, and it is, if a significant number of your development team leave, then in future games, when it says made by your studio name, it should be in quotation marks, and they were talking about Anthem being made by quote-unquote BioWare, because apparently a lot of the staff, like, it's not the same BioWare that existed back in Mass Effect 2, 3, and maybe even Andromeda. So, but if it's good, like, if you think it's worth the money and has legs on it, then I'll probably end up getting it after I get Resident Evil 2.
Well, here's where I'm at with it. I can't make that determination yet. The demo was enough to make me...
Of course not.
The demo was definitely enough to make me explore it. And BioWare as a brand has earned enough faith in me. This is the last pre-order I'm going on pure faith. If I'm not enthralled with this game, I don't pre-order from BioWare anymore. But...
Well... If this game isn't successful, there may not be a BioWare for you to pre-order
that's pretty fair. But anyway, so if you're playing Anthem, hit me up. What I actually want to talk about today, at the close of this episode, is something a little bit more close to my heart. So when Diana Stanley was announced in this game, I took on the mantle in our Discord of Diana's Bay, which is I thought was my final form. But I've realized that I perhaps need to cede a little bit of responsibility, a little bit of control in that role. So now that Diana is released to the world, I'm going to release my role, because now everyone, in fact, has the opportunity to be Diana's Bay. So I'm going back to my old username, and I would invite everyone to be Diana's Bay, try her out. So far, I've had a great experience with her in TCU, and I know this is funny. I'm using Tentacle Time to talk about Arkham Horror, but this is just great for me. The fact that TCU's come out, Diana's in it, Brown Jenkins is in it. Now that I've played through the box, like I said earlier, it just hits so many themes that I dig so hard. Like, there's no way that Matt developed this cycle for me, but it kind of feels that way. So I would invite everyone out there to be Diana's Bay. Nick has already changed his nickname to Biana's Day, which I appreciate.
I was sitting here, I'm like, how long until someone notices?
Not long, it turns out. Because I looked at it and my brain processed it, and I'm like, well, since when is my name fucking Blue? What is happening here? So anyway, look forward to hearing everyone's thoughts on The Circle Undone. And guys, any closing thoughts for this episode before we wrap it up here?
Milan's broken, don't play him.
Appending to that, you know, maybe explore space without him. See how it feels. You might like it. You never know.
Yeah.
Isn't that what I said?
Basically.
Give Attorney Urkel a shot. He deserves it.
All right. Well, to those of you who have listened this far, get your entries in. February 14th. You don't want to miss out on a chance to get these Arbitz tokens. And again, we're going to pick a few runners up that are going to get some other cool prize. And you know what? Based on the pool we have, we'll work with you. We'll be like, hey, you know, you won runner up. Do you have this playmat? Do you have these tokens? Do you have these dividers? Like, we'll work with you within the prize pool that we have. So it'll be worth it for you, even if you don't get the grand prize. February 14th, get your entries into mythosbusterspod@gmail.com. I think I've propped everything else up to this point amply. So guys, thank you for joining us for episode 53 of Mythos Busters. We'll see you for 54.
Bye. Anna's Day.